heard of a name called Pietro Vannucci? Has anybody ever heard of that name? Pietro Vannucci? No? He's a famous Renaissance painter. And he's not as famous as some of the other ones that you might know, like Leonardo da Vinci. But he was a master painter in the late 1400s and early 1500s. He was a student alongside of Leonardo da Vinci. Do you guys know who Leonardo da Vinci is? Okay. Could you imagine being in the same class as Leonardo da Vinci and not quit as a painter? This guy walked beside him. He had a lot of talent, but he wasn't very passionate, and you can imagine why. But he had a famous student, and that student, does anybody know who his famous student was? Wow. You guys are amazing this morning. You didn't know who he was, but you knew who his student was, so it's impressive. How many of you ever heard of Raphael before? At this time in Florence was an absolute incredible time, especially for artists, but for a lot of things. And the reason why we're able to paint light and shadow and see some of the advancements that we have is because of this. One of his famous paintings is called The School of Athens. Have you guys ever seen The School of Athens before? Is anybody familiar with that one? I mean, this painting is absolutely humongous, and nothing like it had been done before. There's also the Sistine Madonna. Have you guys ever heard of that one before? It's in the Sistine Chapel. You guys recognize those little angels down there? Can we zoom in on that? Those guys are on coffee mugs and T-shirts and yeah. There we are. As babies. So this guy had a lot of talent, but I got to tell you, the impact of this man's life. I mean, he gave his life to painting the stories of Jesus and the Old Testament and putting them up in the church so that just regular people who couldn't read could come and actually see what these stories look like. And I mean, talk about just a legacy that he left behind. And I think a lot of times, one thing we neglect is ourselves and what we possibly could be for people. Does that make sense? Who you could be for people. We often focus on people, and so we sow into people, and we never end up sowing into ourselves to become absolutely what God has for us, for all people. Raphael was 11 years old, and he was a painter. His father was a painter. He painted beautiful works of art for an 11-year-old. But this is what's really impressive. And sometimes I think that when we look at our generation, we think we're the smartest generation that ever lived. This generation, when he was 11 years old, he took over his father's business. At 11. That's impressive. You want to talk about raising boys to be men. At 11 years old, he took over his father's business. By the age of 14, he had doubled his father's business. That's very impressive. Now, if you're Raphael and you're an 11-year-old boy and all you know is your father's business and you're there every day, and yes, there are master painters, and yes, he goes into the churches and he sees the beautiful paintings, but he's also hired out because when you're painting something, you'd often have the students come in and just lay down the color. Have you guys ever painted a picture? It's not one layer of paint, it's several layers of paint to kind of pull the light and shadows off. So they often send students to go and lay down the color. So by the time the master painter would get there, he'd just go toot, 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 and then it was done, right? Because the students got so good at painting like the master. So Raphael, at the age of 14, had doubled his father's business. And does that seem successful to you? What kind of drive how does somebody see something more than what they currently have and then lay it all down and walk away from it to go and pursue it? That's absolutely incredible to me. So when he was 14 years old, this guy, as you guys all know, Pietro Vannucci, came along and he took him in as a student. And for the next 4 years, Raphael left the father's business and went and studied under this man for 4 years and developed the light and shadow techniques that people were able to copy after that. That's humbling to me, to see somebody who's very successful lay it all down and say, I can be more than this, and go after it. And this is also humbling. I don't know about you guys, but when I see the world killing it for the love of money, and then I see Christians back on their heels saying, well, at least I'm going to go to heaven. There's pride there. There's arrogance there. Like, we weren't called to sit back on our heels. We were called, and I heard this over and over again as we were working, run the race in such a way to win the prize. So we're going to run the race in such a way, not just to finish the race, but to actually win the prize. And as you're sitting here, how many of you guys have dreams? You have dreams of one day. One day, I have this dream, and this dream's coming down the pike. And I got to tell you, this hit me between the eyes. Time can't sow what you're supposed to sow. Just because something's in the future doesn't mean it's coming down the pike. You have to become the kind of person that fits right into that dream. You have to decide that you're going to become a student. You have to decide what kind of skills and knowledge and relationships. You have to decide to let people come in and critique you. You have to decide this. You have to decide to become the person that actually fits right into that dream. And just because something's in the future doesn't mean it's coming towards you. You have to rise to the occasion of that future. And it's today. And it's not tomorrow, it's today. And you have to decide that you're less interested in being entertained and more interested in being educated. Just as a practical tip, like, you have to decide that. You have to decide that you're not done growing. You have to decide that there's more for you to know. You actually have to decide that your worldview isn't right. Did you know that there's somebody who's walking in your dream right now, and their perspective of how the world works is more accurate than yours? I'd say, well, how do you know that? Because they're walking in your dream. And how they see and what they see in their mind and how the world works and what they've sown into their thinking. Because as a man believes, therefore he is. Their actions now have got them walking in the dream. And I'm not here to say, hey, I'm here to give a sermon so all your dreams come true. It's not necessarily about your dreams. It's about who you are. Then it's about why you're here. And then it's about how that's going to manifest. So who are you? You're a son and daughter of Christ, right? You are the body of Christ on the earth. So why are you here? You're here to love people. You're here to have love be your motive. You're here to be kind. You're here to be generous. You're here to be merciful. You're here as a sign to those on the earth that God is real. Then comes your destiny. And your destiny is built on those two things, your identity and your purpose. And if it's built on something else, it doesn't matter. You'll get to heaven and it'll get all burnt up because you didn't have the right motives. So I'm not saying this, hey guys, let's overachieve for ourselves because we need to have something proven to us. It's been proven to us what our worth is. So we don't have to go out there and we don't have to work hard to prove that we are something. Christ has already proven that we are something. But shouldn't we be more motivated than the world to be all that we could be? Or should we just continue to sit back on our heels and walk in that race? This, I know it might not look like it, but this year I ran a half marathon, right? Whoa. And I was 9 miles into this thing asking the question, why did I ever sign up for this, right? And at the halfway point, Lou Laux, I'm not joking, sprinted by me and gave me a high five and screamed something at me. But he was running so fast I didn't hear what it was. And at mile 9, I said, I have to slow down. I have to take just 20 yards of walking. And I slowed down and started to walk. Do you know what happened? My feet burnt. And it actually got to the point where I couldn't walk. And everything just felt like it was shriveling up. And so I started to run again. This is my fear for us. If you slow down to walk instead of run this race, you'll get used to walking and you'll think you're running. In those races, you get this number that you put on your chest. And it is so easy to forget that you're running in a race. This life is to give him glory. It's not to make sure that things go your way or you get lifted to some high position or something like that. Does God want to lift you to some high position for his glory so that he might have his kingdom principles on the earth, that he might know, people might know who he is through you? Absolutely. But who you are, you're not finished yet. Your worldview isn't done yet. Your worldview, this thing, like, if you can just imagine, like, if you close your eyes and just picture, do you guys remember Bright Lights? Light Brights? Just imagine just a light bright thing of just red and green colors, right? All the red is wrong thinking and all the green is correct thinking. You're called to go and get correct thinking. You're called to go and have your mind transformed, right? According to Romans 12. Why? So that you might be able to manifest Christ more. And I'll say this personally for myself. I think sometimes I know the truth and people just need to get on board with how I think. And that means I'm done. That means I'm finished. That means the Holy Spirit has nothing else to say to me. I got it. And that absolutely is not true. So then here's the question. Why did I come to those conclusions? Because I was living in such a way that I wasn't growing anymore. I wasn't learning anymore. Yeah, I was reading my Bible, and yes, I was praying. But yet, is God done with me? What else does he need me to be for his kingdom? What else does he need you to be for his kingdom? And this dream that's in your heart, what do you need to be to have it come to pass? Because he doesn't set it in your lap. That's what I've come to realize. You know, we went over the parable of the talents last week. He didn't come along to the guy who got one talent and said, hey, don't worry about it. Just come and join me in my joy. Anyway, that guy got thrown out. I don't know about you guys, but in the parable of the talents, that guy who got one talent, do you know what he said to himself? I know it's not in there, but this is what I'd be saying to myself if I was him. He believed that he was correct. Did you know that? He didn't say this to himself. I wonder how I can really get thrown out of here and have weeping and gnashing of teeth. I know what I'll do. I won't do anything. That's not what he said to himself. He said to himself, look at these idiots who are going and investing the money. They're going to lose it. I know what I'll do. I'll go bury it. That way when the master comes back, at least I'll have the talent and I'll give it to the master. When the master comes back, this is what he says to him. He says, hey, I know you to be a hard man, that you gather where you didn't scatter and you reap what you didn't sow. Do you know what he's actually telling the master? You're a thief and the universe is broken. That's what he's saying to the master. He's saying this, I'm right and what I did was right. And I don't know how you got all this money, but you certainly don't deserve it. I deserve it. And I know it's you reap what you sow, but that's not true in my case. There's some more that I should be reaping. And that's not true. And you got to ask the question, and if you're going to read the parables of Jesus and actually have those parables mean something to you, you've got to start to put yourself in the bad position, not in the good position. Because if you think you're in the good position, you'll never be spurred to action. And if you're not spurred to action after reading the words of Jesus, that means you think you're done. And you got it all figured out, and there's no more growing left for you to do. So you might as well, you're baked, you're cooked, you might as well just sit there and grow mold. Because there's nothing else that God could actually possibly do in your life because you got it down. Because how could you come to the words of Jesus, read them, and just be numb to it and have it not cause more action in your heart? So there's problems that you and I face, and one of the biggest problems is we live in groups, and all the group that we hang out with, let's say like we're all in here, right? Do you know that everybody in this room pretty much kind of agrees on how the whole Bible thing is and God is and Holy Spirit thing is? We pretty much hang out with people that don't challenge us or don't have a different opinion. Birds of a feather, what do? I made that up. I don't know how you guys knew that, but birds of a feather, they flock together, right? And what's that leave? That leaves us unchallenged. And so here's the biggest thing. Did you guys know that as Raphael got trained for 4 years, did you know the disciples got trained? Do you know that disciples were pupils? To actually receive discipleship means you actually go and follow somebody. To actually follow somebody, do you know you have to actually recognize fruit in their life? You actually have to look at a person and say, you know what? You must be thinking about this clearly because I look at your life and you've got this. I don't have this in my life, and that might be peace, that might be joy, that might be money, that might be good relationships, whatever it is, but you actually have to have the humility and say, I look at you, and you've got this dream that's in my heart that's supposed to be mind, there's something in your thinking. You've sown something and it's manifested in your actions, and now you have the fruit of it. It means you actually have to recognize the fruit in somebody else's life. But you know what we do instead? We want to share our opinion on the topic. But meanwhile, we don't have the fruit in our life. But we have this opinion. And we want to share our wrong thinking so people might change their mind so they could have the lack of fruit that we have. And there's so many people, there's so much to learn. But you have to put yourself in the student posture. I think a lot of people find themselves as Raphael, as a 14-year-old. Things are going well. Things are going good. He's not a master painter per se, like Da Vinci and Michelangelo, but he's doing pretty good. And they're not willing to take that step to actually become a student and study and watch and learn what it is they have to learn to become a master, to go down in history. If God has prepared good works for us, and he has, that's Ephesians. He's prepared good works beforehand. Before you were born, there were good works prepared for you to do. What kind of backup in the pipe is clogged with destiny of people who never reached the good works that they were supposed to do? When you look on the earth and you say, is the will of God happening on the earth? Through the church, through Christians, as a whole, is it going down? It should be a good sign to you that there's a lot of destiny backed up in the pipes. I believe that God has something just absolutely amazing for all of you in here. And some of you guys who are older per se, I don't know about you, but if I was in the last 20 years of my life, I'd be wanting to run this thing in such a way that my legacy was clear. I don't care how old you are. You got more in the tank. There's more for you to do. There's a legacy for you to live behind. And if you're young, my goodness. When I was 14, I knew everything. I knew absolutely everything. They should have just put me on a mountain in a temple. And you should just come to me and just ask me questions. Because I had answers. I didn't have any fruit in my life, but I had an answer for everything. And I thought my parents just didn't get it. And there's still adults walking around with a 14-year-old mindset who want to share their opinion, but yet still don't have the fruit. And it's like, God, help us. Just help us. Oh. Because if we don't collectively decide that God has more for us as individuals, I was thinking about this today. What if destinies are tied together in groups? Think about that for a second. What if I don't become what I'm meant to be, and that actually prevents somebody else from stepping into what they were supposed to step into? And we did this when I went over with King Joash and what it is that he walked through. This guy who didn't tap the arrows 5 times had a whole nation deported. The will of God not happening in everybody's life because this one man wasn't hearing God at the right time. And you start to think about this, and it's like, what could you become? And how could that affect the people around you? For the glory of the Lord, not for you. You could get to the top of the food chain. There's nothing up there that's going to satisfy your soul. You already know that as Christians. So I'm not saying like, hey, let's go achieve for ourselves because we'll feel better. You can go feel better every morning. And you go to the foot of the cross and you stare at it and you just say, wow, I can't believe I'm worth this much. You can feel good every morning. I know what's at the top of the food chain. It's just more responsibility. But if it's for the glory of Christ, then my goodness, let's get there. If it means that his will can happen on the earth, for his sake, not our own, then let's get there together. How many of you understand what I'm talking about this morning? I'm going to give you 3 things, 3 choices you'd have to make if you understand what I'm talking about. The first thing you'd have to do is aim. And what I mean by that, you have to pick something. My son, I think the greatest thing, like I think a lot of times with children, we're like, oh, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? The most important thing that you can teach a child is that they can get better at something. I don't care what it is. It doesn't matter if they want to play soccer, but they're not going to be a soccer player. If they play soccer and realize that they can get better at it, lesson learned, it was well worth the jersey cost, right? Pick something and get better at it. And have your motive right. And know that if I get better at this, then I'll be prepared for that dream that God's put in my heart, his good works. And I'm not doing it for myself, I'm doing it for him. I know me. I am not an overachiever by any stretch of the word. You can go back and look at my report cards from kindergarten. They say this in them: Adam does not reach his full potential. It says that almost every marking period. But it said that he's a very social guy, basically. But if you would just decide, okay, like, here's this thing, and here's where I'm at, and this is what I would have to be to fit right into what God's called me to. So I'm going to work. I'm not saying you change overnight. I'm saying pick a small thing, just something small that's easy enough, that you could do very easily and not fail at it, that would just help you become who you're supposed to be. And if it's like, how many of you guys believe that if you're married, you're called to love your spouse? Yeah? If that thing's not going the way it should be going, then just pick that. And just decide that I'm going to be a better spouse. If it's being a better parent, then pick it and just decide, like, this is how I'm going to be a better parent. I'm still perplexed sometimes of how I'm going to transfer some things that I know into my son. And what that actually looks like. And time goes by, and he's getting older and older and older. If it's your career, then pick that. If it's evangelism, then pick that. If it's giving, then pick that. Right? If it's teaching, then pick that. Then become a better teacher. Whatever gifts that God's put in you, become better at them. Because it's not just coming down the pike because time's going by. Time will not sow your seed. You have to sow your seed. The second thing says this in Matthew 10:41. It says, he who receives a prophet in the name of a prophet shall receive a prophet's reward, and he who receives a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. And Matthew 7:15 through 20 talks about beware of false prophets. But then it says this: you will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, so find somebody who's producing grapes. And figs are not gathered from thistles, so find somebody who's producing the figs. Even so, every good tree bears good fruit. Somebody out there is doing what you want to do, and they're crushing it. Go hear what they have to say about it. Go and so the second thing is called find. You need to find the person who's doing what it is that you want to do, and you need to buy them a meal, sit down and talk to them and excavate their mind and figure out how they think differently than the way you think. That's all the disciples did with Jesus, and that's all Jesus did with the disciples, is he changed their thinking, and changed their thinking for 3 years. The final thing is correct. Correct your thinking. Come to the conclusion and say this person has the fruit, I don't. And God help me, I know I've done it oftentimes. Like, have you guys ever had something happen in your life where you think that if somebody was in your situation, they couldn't handle it better than you because you're handling it poorly, and you come up with an excuse? Like sometimes people say this, they said, well, if you were married to my spouse, then you'd be in the same boat, right? Or if you had this kid, you'd be in the same boat. Or if you worked at my job, you'd be in the same boat. No one could do it better than the way I'm handling it. I'm not handling it very good, but nobody could. And it's like, God help me if I've ever had that mentality. Talk about not honoring people. Some people, the good things they have in their life is because they've acted honorably and good. Not because the universe is broken. It's because they're thinking better than you. So go ask them how they're thinking about things and get what it is they have. That's all the disciples did with Jesus. It's actually called discipleship, and it hasn't been around probably for about 30 years in the church. I asked Jen and Jared Hartman this week. I went up to them, and for those of you guys who don't know Jen and Jared, they run Kids Kyle. And I said this. I said, hey, Jen, what kind of devotions do you do with your kids? Because I knew they were just going to be outrageous, right? And she goes, well, Monday is Missions Monday, and we pray for missionaries, and Tuesdays is all about the tongue, and we watch what we say and speak in tongues, and Wednesdays about the world, and we pray for the world. And I was just like, she's just good at it. She is good at transferring the gospel into her children. And I see it. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but I just see it, so I need to ask her questions about how she does that, because she thinks better about it than I do. This verse, there was one verse that kind of summarized what I'm saying. Let me just read it to you. It says, Colossians 3:23 through 25. And whatever you do, do it heartily, as to the Lord and not to men. Your job, your parenting, your skills, your ability, your relationships, everything that you have and everything that you do is supposed to be unto the Lord, as if you were doing it for the Lord. Can you imagine that? I mean, this might sound silly, but let's say you're outside, like, greeting people as they're coming in. What if I told you, hey, Jesus Christ is coming in to check out praise this morning. Get ready for it. If you have to change the way you're greeting, something's wrong, right? Knowing that from the Lord, listen to this, you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. But he who does wrong will be repaid for what he has done, and there is no partiality. I know for me personally, I've already decided I could do a much better job at some basic things in my life. And I've put a plan together to do them, and I'm doing it. It's nothing big. It's not a big deal. It's not like, the wife and kids don't see him anymore because I'm working on something. I've personally set aside a half hour at night. I figured I could do a half hour at night to get better at what I know I need to get better at, to have God come with his plans and me be prepared for them. Are you going to be prepared for them? Do you know what they are? Do you know what you have to be for those plans? And are you going to prepare? And do you know who you need to talk to? If you can have the humility to do those things, we would see the will of God done on the earth in such an incredible way. And you could stand in front of him. How many of you guys would like a clean conscience and stand in front of God and said, I ran that race in such a way as if I was running for the prize to win it? Would you guys stand with me? I'm going to ask the ministry teams to come forward, and I'm going to ask you guys just right now just to kind of dream with me. Just shut your eyes. The first thing I want you to think about is I want you to think about your dream or the thing that you need to get better at. I just want you to think about it for a second. Now I want you to think about a person who has the fruit that you're looking for, who's walking in that dream or has that thing that you need to be walking in. Now I want you to think about the skills and abilities and the things that you need to know. Now I want you to think about one small step. What's a small step you could take this week to actually becoming who you're meant to be? What's something that you could personally work on so that you could run this race with excellence? If it's marriage, Just going up to your spouse and say, hey, if I was going to do something for you this week that was small, what's something that would really bless you? Or if it's your kids, man, find somebody who's just knocked it out of the park with their kids. I bet you they had patterns in their life, and I bet you they had routine. It's a position at work. Going and talking to somebody who's in that position. Because God has plans for his kids. But if his kids can't handle the plans, there is no way he would crush you with something that you're not prepared for. I just want to show you one more slide. It's at the very end of Raphael's life. He's 37 years old. He's lying in a deathbed. They didn't live very long back then, but they could paint, man. He painted this right here. This is called the Ascension of Christ. This was to give people an idea of what was going on during this story. He died, and this painting wasn't finished. And I don't know if you could see it, but there's 3 figures in the left corner there. They're just painted remarkably. He left this painting unfinished, and his 2 students that he had at the time locked themselves up in the house and wouldn't let anybody in. And for an entire week, they just went to town on this painting. And when they got done with this painting, do you know what they did? They came out and they said, this is Raphael's painting. You know what they didn't do? They didn't say this. Hey, can you tell which part I did? In my opinion, those three characters are probably the best painted in this painting. But the humility that Raphael had got passed on to his students. We're called to have the humility of Christ. I know we often talk about those 12 guys who changed the world. Why can't we be like them? I think it's because we're not willing to give up what they gave up to follow and have humility and follow Christ for 3 years. There are people who are Christ-like in your life, who have fruit that you might be missing, that you could go and talk to, and you could reap the benefits of knowing them. For those of you guys who need prayer, I have a prayer team up here where they'd love to minister to you. And it was so good to have you guys in. Thank you guys. Bless you.